If young men are walking into your doctrinally sound, inoffensive churches, what they're going to see is cowardice. They're going to see cowardice. And you can lecture them all day. Well, you shouldn't be here to find strong man. You should be here to just focus on Jesus. Jesus was a strong man. And the people that God lifted up as men after God's own heart, whether it be David, whether it be Elisha, whether it be Elijah, whether it be Joshua, whether it be Caleb, were strong men. I mean, how did we lose this? How did we lose this as a desire to try to win people through Christ by being inoffensive? Now look, I recognize in 1 Peter 3:15, it says, first, sanctify Christ in your heart and always be prepared to give a response for the hope that is in you, but to do so with gentleness and respect. I understand that. But you know what I've noticed? The modern Western church puts all the emphasis on gentleness and respect and completely loses the first, sanctify Christ in your hearts. Christ didn't promise you an easy time as long as you didn't offend anyone. He promised you that the message of the cross would offend. He promised you that the moral order that Christianity dictates, not suggests, dictates, would offend. And somehow we thought, what? With niceness and inoffensiveness, you would win people to Christ? Is that the model he gave? Let me ask you something. Ray Comfort did a great job of actually pointing this out. He said, if you look at the way that Christ ministered when he was on earth, which should be our standard, he pointed out that he gave judgment to the proud and grace and mercy to the broken. So the prostitute that shows up and breaks the perfume and starts washing Jesus' feet with her hair, that is a broken woman. You notice she didn't come in hanging all over everybody, selling her wares, and Jesus saying, oh yeah, I'm going to hang out with her. That's not what happened. She showed up absolutely broken. And he provided grace and mercy. Now, the political leaders, he gave judgment to them. The people that were desecrating the temple, he gave judgment to them. He didn't look at the political and religious leaders of his time and say, hey guys, I think you're slightly off. No, it was you whitewashed tombs, you brood of vipers, your father the devil. What about that is inoffensive? What about that it is nice? And yet that's what he did. Have you ever seen Elijah talking to the prophets of Baal? He wasn't only harsh, he was openly sarcastic and mocking of their false god. And here we are in the modern church, and we seem to think that our role, our place in society, is to make sin comfortable in our presence. Where do you get that? I want to know. Where do you show me in Scripture where you find one example of Christ making sin comfortable in his presence? Because I can't find it. And when young men walk into your church, here's what I would encourage you to do. Men in the church, you had better project the biblical masculinity. Women in the church, you had better project biblical femininity. Because both of those things are incredibly strong and powerful. Go read Judges, and homegirl's putting a tent peg through a pagan king's head. Go read Proverbs 31. Tina, you describe Proverbs 31 as one of the most intimidating women you've ever read about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go read about what the biblical obligation is for men in society, in the church, in their families. You don't see some weak again, feckless man that doesn't know how to make a decision. You see strong, competent, capable, loving, kind men that are capable of protecting and providing for themselves, their families, and their church. You see them placing obedience to God above comfort all the way up to and including their death for the cross if it's required of them. You show young men walking into your church right now that is the sort of passion, love, and conviction that you have, and they will stay. But if you don't, they're going to turn right around and walk out. Not because you didn't emphasize Christ, but because you didn't project him in your actions. And what are they going to find when they look elsewhere? And for everybody who wants to tell me that what I'm saying is incorrect, understand something. I grew up in the church. And I had people within the church that I admired, that I respected, that I liked. But the overall predominant version of masculinity I saw in the church was weak and overly emotional. And I wanted to be a soldier. I wanted to be a Green Beret. I wanted to go fight wars. I wanted to be strong and capable. Why did I not find that kind of masculinity in the church that I grew up in? I found it among individuals, but it was not a predominant theme. So what got me back? I never totally walked away from my faith, but what got me back? It was meeting people like my neighbor, Anthony Brown, who was a strong man. He didn't preach at me every time that he saw me doing something I shouldn't do. He was a strong man. He lived a life in a certain way that told me, that indicated to me that this idea of strong masculinity and biblical fealty were not mutually exclusive. In fact, they were mandatory. Ryan Nienaber, a team leader I had in Special Forces, great operator, good shot, good fighter, intelligent, wise. Again, didn't sit there and preach at me at every little thing, but you know what he did do? He set an example, and he would never compromise the truth to make anyone feel comfortable. I had another gentleman, and this is another part too that Christian has brought up that I think is absolutely essential. I had another gentleman in the 18 Fox course that I went through, another Green Beret, who I just saw was bold for his faith. When people would stand up and question something, this guy would stand up, and not only would he boldly defend the faith, he did so with a level of intellectual rigor that blew away everybody in the class. He was the personification, in my mind at that moment in my life, he was the personification of a man that didn't just love the Lord his God with all of his heart, with all of his strength, but with all of his mind as well. And so this is the question. Is this what young men are going to find when they walk in and they see other men who are living in this way, who are truly loving God with all their heart, with all their mind, with all their spirit, with all their strength? That's when they're going to stay. But if they don't find it, they will go try to find it for somebody else, and they will settle. They will settle for a kind of masculine paganism that answers the primary question that they have right now, which is, what is my meaning and purpose in life? I'll give you one other example of this from personal experience. I go and I speak to a lot of men's groups. I speak to a lot of student groups. And I was just at another one. I tried this for the third time. I said, all right, guys, I'm coming here, I'm speaking because it's through, Young America's Foundation. It's usually political in nature. And so a lot of the people that show up to this are interested in politics. And a lot of them want to have a career in politics. So when they read off my bio, they read off three things. They read off that I was a Green Beret. They read off that I served for 10 years in the Virginia General Assembly. And they read about my social media presence. They read off those three things. And I asked a room of about 300 young men, I said, which one of those impresses you the most? And all of them, like in unison, said, Green Beret. Why? Is it because they all wanted to be Green Berets one day? No. Some of them were considering going into the military, but it was a significant minority within the group. So why weren't they most impressed with me being a legislator? Why weren't they most impressed with a social media following? Why were they most impressed with the idea of being a Green Beret combat veteran? Because there's something inside men. Is it because they're growing up in a culture which elevates that? Quite the opposite. And yet it's still there. Why? Maybe it's because That was the thing that indicates to them that I know how to handle myself in a dangerous and violent situation. And maybe God has written it onto our hearts to be the sort of men that can deal with dangerous and violent situations, to uphold what we believe and protect what we love. And maybe that's an indication of something. Maybe that's the sort of thing that we should be projecting, not because you have to be a Green Beret, not because you have to be a professional fighter, but because even when we look at the ministry of Christ, we see someone that was willing to go into dangerous, uncomfortable situations and speak the truth no matter what, up to and including his death for us. I think your men are looking for someone to be an example, and I think they're looking for someone to give them discipleship. But they're not going to accept that you are worthy of it. They're not going to see you as an effective representative for the God you claim to worship and serve if you are completely unwilling to do or say anything that might cause offense to an overly sensitive generation.